You have in front of you is just a very, very beautiful piece from the Nesiva Shalom that I definitely think could be a source of chizuk, especially with the tekufa that we're in. The pasuk tells us, we'll just run through it. It's very, very easy, very, very nice. It's definitely related to what I'll be talking about Shabbos day, for sure. The pasuk says, "V'yishba Yosef es bnei Yisrael leimar pakoid yifkoid elikim eschem balisem es etzmeisai miza." One of the last things that Yosef HaTzadik said before he passed away was he told Klal Yisrael, he told the Shvatim, "Pakoid yifkoid elikim eschem." Hashem will take you out of Mitzrayim. Pakoid yifkoid, you shall surely be redeemed. Balisem es etzmeisai miza, and you should take my bones out with you. But Pakoid yifkoid. Pakoid Yifkoid, by the way, was not just a reference to the fact that Klal Yisrael will get out. It was like keywords. It was like a code. That was the Medrash says that's how they knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was legit. Because when they didn't believe Moshe, Hashem told Moshe just Pakoid Yifkoid, say Pakoid Yifkoid, because that was always the key words that Yosef HaTzadik, when he said Pakoid Yifkoid, that was his way of saying that there will be a Redeemer, and the way you know he'll be legit is he'll say Pakoid Yifkoid. Which I heard, I think it's true, that Pakoid Yifkoid is Gematria Tavshin Pei Dalet. So it's Halavai. So the point is, Hashem said, Yosef said, Pakoid Yifkoid Kemizah, Hashem's going to take you out and take my bones out. Amdu HaMafarshim Al Inik Felis Al Lashon Pakoid Yifkoid. The Mafarshim talk about what's this Lashon Pakoid Yifkoid, what's the meaning behind it. Gam Yesh Lahavin, and this is his Iker piece. Etzem Inyan Gulas Mitzrayim. I've talked about this around Pesach time, but it's very kedai chazer to sort of learn it again. That around Mitzrayim, we know that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us from Mitzrayim, Shedarshu Chazal, the Chazal tell us from the pasuk, V'avarti ani v'lei malach ani v'lei saraf. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, b'kvoide ba'atzmai, took us out of Mitzrayim. Ani v'lei malach ani v'lei saraf. Not through an angel, Hashem himself. And the question is why? And this is, I think, very, very, very sadistic because we're all hoping that this tekufa is leading towards Mashiach, and I think that there's a glaring issue that a lot of us don't want to talk about when you think about the coming of Mashiach. There's one glaring problem, and I think he's going to address it. It says that when it comes to leaving Mitzrayim, which we know the leaving Mitzrayim was the prototype for us leaving this galus, right? The Chassam Sofer, whenever he talks about Mashiach, he always compares it to Moshe Rabbeinu. Mitzrayim is sort of like the prototype of all of Galus. So how did we leave Mitzrayim? Hashem himself. Ani v'lei malach, ani v'lei sarf. And the question is why? Why couldn't Hashem appoint a malach? Let a malach take us out. Why did it have to be Hashem himself? There are many answers for this. The Arizal gave a very, very interesting answer, which is not the approach that he's going to take, but it's an interesting answer. He said that the Arizal said that Mitzrayim was so tummy that if he would have sent the malach in, the malach would have been lost. The malach wouldn't have come out. That's what the Arizal said. So Hashem had to do it himself. But what's the pshat that Hashem has to do it himself? He can't appoint a malach. So he says like this: V'yesh lavara inyan. Let's explain. Dihina matzinu beis oifanim shel geula. We find there are two ways to have redemption. There are two ways to have redemption, and that's ita or achishana. Right? Ita means the proper time, and achishana means you're worth it. You're worthy, which we all know. This is what we're told since we're kids. Mashiach will come in the year 6,000, whatever that means, however you calculate it, whatever that means. That's Ita. There is a time where the suffering must end. Right? Kate Sam Lachoshech. Everything has a proper time. So there is a time where the suffering must end. And then if you're worthy, you can come right now. I'll just say a lot of this outside because I have a bit of a headache, so I'd rather just talk. Here's the problem. The problem was Mitzrayim was neither, right? Mitzrayim had, the Golus of Mitzrayim was supposed to last 400 years. It didn't. And you can say, well, 210 is Ki'ilu 400, it was as suffering. That's Terutzim that Hashem gives after the fact. But it wasn't 400. It wasn't 400 years. So it wasn't Ita, because 400 years is 400 years. So Hashem makes Terutzim. This is always the Yisayid. Hashem could always make things to help you. He could always, twist himself in a pretzel to help you out. But Lamaise wasn't Ita, and it also wasn't Achishena. Klaisa was not worthy. They were on a very, very low madrega. They were on the 49th level. If they would have stayed there for one more moment, they would have been lost. So what exactly, how did it work? That's his kasha. We find that Mashiach can come in one of two ways, and this is true by this dar, and this is true by Mitzrayim as well. Ita rachik shana, in its time, or if you're worthy. Ita hu aketz hakavu lagula. She'ena tola b'agnasim shel Yisrael. There is a time where HaKadosh Baruch Hu just says, listen, there's a time where the clock runs out. And also, and according to most Mefarshim, that's what Yaakov Avinu was trying to tell them. He was trying to tell them it'll be 400 years. Or 6,000, depending on different Mefarshim of which Gula he was referring to. And the reason why he didn't, again, there's many, many explanations of why why Hashem didn't want Yaakov to end up telling him. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe's approach, which I think is the most straightforward approach, is that if you tell Klal Yisrael it's going to be 6,000 years, that's very disheartening. Or if you tell the Shvatim it's going to be 400 years, that's also very disheartening. You want to think that it could happen right now. Part of the process that we've been going through for the last 3 months, and I've heard from people many, many times that, like, whenever you say, like, oh, this could be Mashiach, they say, well, they thought that in the 40s. First of all, yeah, okay. Your job is you're supposed to get your hopes up. Like, that's the job. You have a responsibility to believe Mashiach can come today. The fact that he didn't come yesterday doesn't excuse you of Yechiyah. But Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz does say that part of the healing process for Klal Yisrael going through difficulties is knowing that it could end now. That does. It's a healing mechanism. And if Klal Yisrael knew, 1,000 years ago, during the Crusades or Tachvatah, whatever it is, if they knew with a certainty, he's not coming for another 800 years, it's very, very disheartening. So there's the time. And then there's also V'yesh Gula Shalchi Shena. There's a Gula of, if you're worthy. Kasha Yisrael Zoichem. We know this. The problem is, Mitzrayim was neither. And he says, V'hine Gulas Mitzrayim Le'hoisi Yechayel Yisaydi Beis B'chinas Eilu. And which is, I think, sort of a lot of us. This is a problem that we have with our redemption as well. None of us want to wait till the year 6,000. That could be a long time. And I know. Mr. Lorch isn't here, but Kilu, he's here. I know that Rav Schwab had a different calculation to make it less. No one wants to wait for the clock to run out. Although the world is sort of running on fumes. I think we're all kind of seeing that. Like the same way when your car is just dying, like at certain points, Hashem is just, okay, it's like a Lahavdil Alpha Avidal. It's like a TV show that's like gone on for too long where the storylines are getting strange. But anyway, the kids say, but Lamaisa, it's running out. It's running out of time. But nobody wants to wait for that. And then you want to say, well, Klal Yisrael could be worthy. Now, that is comforting. And also, part of the reason why it's comforting is because we don't know the definition of worthy, right? Like if you have Jews that are not religious, and they wear a Magen David, for all you know, in Hashem's eyes, that's a level of righteousness that we don't necessarily calculate. So the fact that you look around and you say, well, it doesn't seem like the world is going in the deserving direction. Well, we don't know the barometers. We don't know what's considered deserving or not. But there is a problem deep down, I think you could ask yourself, which is like, it doesn't seem either. It's definitely not the time, and I don't necessarily see the world. The Baruch Hashem, the last couple months, since October 7th, Klal Yisrael has definitely, shown things that, I think a lot of us didn't necessarily see before. There's a lot of level vachtos, and it's very, very impressive. But still, you still look around, and you're like, I don't know, the world as a whole, it doesn't seem to be Achi Shena either. So you have Itar Achi Shena, and it's neither. So the question is, how did Mitzrayim happen? And Mesiva Shalom says, and Mitzrayim was the same problem. Gulas Mitzrayim Mitzrayim was neither either. Because he says, right? It wasn't the year 400. They were definitely not worthy. They were on a very low level. We all know this, that they were on such a low level. If they would have stayed one moment later, they would have been lost. And more than that, when they left Mitzrayim and they got to Yam Suf, right? The Yam Suf, the Medrash, didn't want to split because the Yam Suf said, Halalu oivdei avodah zara, v'halalu oivdei avodah zara. I don't see the difference. The Jews also look like Mitzrayim to me. So how did the Gula happen? The answer is, and this is a big aside from the Siva Shalom, and that is that I'll give you a mashal. Okay, the mashal is you have a father Rav Wolfson gives this mashal. I think it's a good mashal. You have a father who tells his kid many, many times, do not ride your bike outside. It's dangerous. I don't want you to ride. You're not allowed to ride your bike. You're not going to ride my bike, not going to ride my bike. Of course, the kid starts riding his bike. Instantly, the first thing that happens is the father's very angry. And he starts getting very, very mad. But what happens, and he hears the kid, crash a little bit, and instantly he's like, I told you. He starts getting very mad. But then what happens if he looks at the kid and he realizes it's a lot worse than he thought. The injury is worse than he thought. And it's maybe even life-threatening. Then all of a sudden what you're going to see is that he doesn't care about the fact that he broke the rules anymore. Why? Because we've gotten to a much more serious situation. The truth is, that's exactly how the Gula of Mitzrayim happened. Hashem had his rules. He made his rules. His rules were that the Gula could come of one of two ways. It could either come by the year 400 or if they're worthy. Those are the rules that God made. But you know what happened? Klal Yisrael was going to be lost. It was getting to a point where this cannot continue. The situation as it stood could not last. And therefore what you needed is the maker of the rules to say, the heck with the rules, I'm breaking it. And he says like this, the truth is they couldn't stay there any longer. That's why it had to happen so quickly. Why? He says, Klal Yisrael was in danger of being lost. The truth is, Rav Wolfson says that was what Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to employ. We find that when Moshe Rabbeinu was davening to get Klal Yisrael forgiven for the Egel, he said the following line, Ona chata chata gedola, that he tells Hashem, the Klal Yisrael sinned a very, very big sin. So the question is obvious. If you're trying to defend us, don't make it such a big deal. You should make it less, and you shouldn't. If you're our lawyer defending us, don't say that it was a big sin. Say it was a tiny little sin. Don't try to make it smaller, not bigger. So what Wolfson said is that Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to trigger this emotional response from Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to tell Moshe, like he's sort of like, it's lahavdil, it's like a mother. He was like the mother of Klal Yisrael talking to the father, and he basically said, listen, I understand you're upset, and you have your rules, and they broke the rules of the Egel, but you know they're going to be lost here. Chata gedola. This was, like, we're past the rule stage. You're going to lose the kid, and therefore it's sort of like, just break the rules, because you're the one who wrote it, so chata gedola. And Rav Wolfson even writes that he says that that's the objective on Yom Kippur. He talks about this on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, it's one of his big themes. That on Yom Kippur, he says the avodah of Yom Kippur is to get there. And he says most people don't, the way, and we'll see, Nesiv Shalom differs, but then Rav Wolfson feels that the way to get there, how do you get to that point of Hashem basically saying, I don't care about the rules anymore, we got to save the kid. So Rav Wolfson says the way to get there is through desperation. Meaning you have to tap into that point of like, I don't think we can go on anymore. Which by the way, Rav Wolfson says it's not something that most people are comfortable doing. That's not a comfortable way to live your life, to just to go to that place. It's a very, very real place. But once a year, that's the Avodah of Yom Kippur. But he basically says like this. Says Rav Wolfson, Shekvar Amdu Lipo B'Shar Hanun, says the Nesiv Shalom, Asher Kol Baya Lo Yeshuvun, Umishom Kvar Lo Yichayim Latzes, V'lachin Nitzur Hagula Liyas B'Chipazin, Ki Lo Yachol Asmamei Oid. What the Nesiv Shalom is telling us is that there's a third form of the Gula. There's a Gula of Ita, of the time. There's a Gula of Achishena, of whether you're worthy. And then there's a third Gula, which he calls a Gula Shaloi Al Pi Seder, which is the creator of the rules will just say, game over. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. I made the rules, and therefore I'm willing to break the rules for my kid. And we'll see of how you trigger that response from Hashem, which I think is a very comforting thing, because when you sort of, I definitely before October 7th, but October 7th has not made this better, but when you sort of look around the world and you say, like, I don't understand. I mentioned this. I got up and I said a vart similar to this from Rav Wolfson, and someone in the shul I never met before. I was basically talking about how the world is not, it's getting more and more chaotic and more just upside down. And it's just becoming crazier and crazier and crazier. At the time, I wasn't even talking about the fact that you have like countries and millions of people siding with Hamas, which is a Pele Gadol. But even more than that, just stam, you have like the craziness of the world of what's going on. Anyone who knows what I'm talking about, just look into it. It's like a crazy stuff. So I mentioned this, and some guy came over to me after davening. I never met him before, and he started giving me like a shtak musar about how do you say that about the world? The world is getting better. It's getting better. Okay, so that's what he wants to say. But my approach is it's taka getting worse, and there's a certain beauty to that because there's a certain point where Hashem will say, okay, there's a certain point where HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at Klal Yisrael and says like, how long am I gonna leave the Ben Melech in this very, very chaotic state, and at some point that will trigger a geula that's neither ita or achishena, but just the same way Mitzrayim happened, neither. It was just because the creator of the rules. And by the way, that's why you couldn't have a malach do it. Malachim are all about structure. They're all within the world of structure. You can't send a malach to break the rules. That's not their avodah. You need the creator of the rules to go break it. And Nesiv Shalom says like this: that also explains why did the gula have to be so miraculous, so strange, so over the top. It wasn't even all necessary to have each makkah just going more and more and more over the top. Shalei be said breaking teva, constantly breaking teva. So what's the pshat? So the simple pshat is Hashem wanted to show his chavivas for Klal Yisrael. He wanted to show how much he cares about Klal Yisrael. But it's still very strange. Hashem is usually his rules. He does not break teva often, and when he does, it has to be necessary. The makkahs weren't even necessary. Makkahs Becharis was one that did it. The first 9, why does he have to do all this of blood and hail and fire in the hail and all these things? What's the pshat? The answer is Hashem was trying to ingrain within the world to realize this salvation was shaloi al piteva, meaning this was not within the rule works. Within the rules, there's ita and achishena. But we need now a new geula that's breaking the rules. And therefore Hashem wanted to show that's what's happening here. The rules are being broken in every form. So the question is, and he says like this, we'll go a little weiter. Al derech zeh towards the bottom, Gula Mitzrayim shall piseder an haga, yafshar yiligal yisrael misham. Again, according to the rules, it wasn't possible. And he explains on the top left side that the mashal for this is of why Hashem had to do this. He says the mashal is that you have a prince who's drowning, and the prince fell into a well, and the king is sitting there with his scepter and his crown. And obviously, according to the rules of the government, should the king with his crown and his scepter jump into the well? Of course not. But to heck with the rules, because then if he keeps the rules, there's going to be no prince. And then what's the point of this? What's the point of the kingdom if there's no heir? And therefore, Hashem it needed not to be through a malach. It needed to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kfay de ba'atzmai went, because the geula of Mitzrayim was neither ita or achishena. It was just because this cannot continue. And therefore you need the person, the creator of the game, so to speak, to break the game because just this can't keep going on. And it's sort of how also a little bit what the world is going on right now. Again, it doesn't mean, God forbid, that Klal Yisrael is not Zaycha. Halavai, we should be Zaycha right now. But even if there are not Chas Shalom Achishen in the classic sense, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu also makes it in such a way that the world is so chaotic to the point where Hashem's like, this is so the antithesis of Torah. This can't keep going on anymore. And therefore, I'm just going to interrupt it and say, that's it, we're done. Now the question is, and this is the point. So you want this, right? We all want this. Now, so how do you get this? So you just say, well, you have to let the world get more and more crazy. But there has to be something that we could do to trigger this. The rule is, if you see on the bottom left paragraph, Kol isarusa mile'ela tzricha hachana v'sarusa dilatata. If you want Hashem to act in any way, the rules, the way Hashem created the world is in such a way that if you want Him to act, you have to do something to trigger that action. You need isarusa dilatata. You need an action down here to awaken the isarusa dilatela above. Right? You want something, you daven. You ask for it. That's how Hashem created the world. Everything is like that. There's every hanhaga from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is done by us doing something to trigger that. So the question is, how do we trigger this form of geula? Besides for just being desperate, but how do you trigger that? Right? We now have a new form of davening where we're asking Hashem to end Galus now and to end the suffering privately or collectively. By the way, this could be true on a private form where you say to Hashem, listen, I just can't keep going on like this. Not God forbid, I'm not talking like in a suicidal way, God forbid, but just this is not a long-term solution. It's not the time where it's supposed to end, and it's not the time, and I'm not zoicha. Okay, so what? You made the rule, so why can't you break it for me? So then, what do we have to do to trigger that response? So again, sort of Wolfson said, what you have to do is to be desperate and to daven in that way. But that's not necessarily a way that most people can do on a regular basis. I don't even know if that's a healthy thing to tap into that place of desperation on a regular basis. Probably not. So what's another way? This is Nesiv Shalom's approach, a very beautiful approach of what does Klal Yisrael need to do in order to awaken that type of geula. A geula, not of ita, not of chishena, but of pakod yifkod, that Hashem will just take you out of l'mayla min ateva, l'mayla min azman, lo yalidei malach, lo yalidei saraf, but Hashem Himself. So just read the words in the Nesiv Shalom. Kol isarusam le'ela tzricha hachana v'sarusam le'tata. Anytime you want anything from above, any shefa to come down from above, you have to do something to awaken it. You have to open up the valve in order to bring it down. And this is one line. What is the approach? What does a Jew need to do in order to arouse this type of ahava from Hashem, where that would get Hashem to basically say, "That's it. I'm stopping. I'm stopping the game. I'm stopping the experiment." And it doesn't make sense, but I'm doing this because I wrote the rules. So what does a Jew have to do? It says in the Nesiv Shalom, it's one line, and that is Emuna shel Yehudi b'hanag hazos. You have to believe that Hashem is willing to do this. Meaning, Shayidei Shem Maimin ba'ahavas Hashem liYisrael shibli gvul. If a Jew has to believe that Hashem cares about Klal Yisrael enough to do that, that's the key. You have to believe, and this is what I'm going to talk about Shabbos Day. Part of it is to start looking at Klal Yisrael in a more softer way. Like in your old age, you have to become like softer in your old age. You have to start finding the positive, and you have to start looking at Klal Yisrael with softer eyes. And if a Jew looks at Klal Yisrael that way, and meaning Hashem is not willing to, He's only going to break the rules for His kid because His kid is in danger. But in order to awaken that level of ahava, you have to believe that Klal Yisrael is worthy of being saved. You see, if your approach to life is that of a very tough, very, dismissive, or just very, very judgmental way of looking at Klal Yisrael, then why would you? This whole approach only works because Hashem is like looking at His kid with a tremendous amount of love and desperation. If you don't look at Klal Yisrael that way, or you don't believe that Klal Yisrael is deserving of someone to break the rules, you see, a Jew has to believe that Klal Yisrael is worthy of the rules being broken for. If you believe in that, and that's how you look at Klal Yisrael as a whole, then all of a sudden Hashem will also be that way, right? That if you have that level of limud zchus, if that level of positivity towards Klal Yisrael, and you say, listen, they're amazing people, or you look at you say, listen, right now they're going through a very difficult matziv, but imagine what they could do if they weren't. If you look at it that way, then all of a sudden Hashem looks at Klal Yisrael that way as well, and then Klal Yisrael will now get that level of chen and that level of charm that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's needed in order to save the prince. So he says like this: you have to believe that Hashem's love for Klal Yisrael has no bounds. And you have to believe that Hashem is the ultimate good, and He cares enough about Klal Yisrael that He's willing to break the rules. It's with this faith that you bring down that level of redemption. That's, by the way, the real yesod of how Klal Yisrael got out of Galus. The truth is, this is one of the Rishonim writes. This is a Rosh. The Rosh on Al Torah. The Rosh on Al Torah has a very The Balaturim also really talks about this, but the Rosh Hashanah says that when Klal Yisrael got out of Golus, right? We all know, it's hard to know exactly what happened, but we know that some Jews did not get out of Choshech, whatever that means. I don't know the numbers. There's different midrashim that imply different numbers, but definitely Jews died in Choshech, right? Not every Jew got out. So you'd assume that the Jews that did get out were probably much better than the Jews that didn't get out. But the problem is that the Jews that did get out, we all know, as I quoted before, when they got to the Mitzrayim, when they got to Yamsuf, the Yamsuf didn't want to split for them because they said halalu ev de'avodah zarah, halalu ev de'avodah zarah, which means that the Jews that got out were also very, very flawed. So if the Jews that got out were flawed, then what separated them from the Jews that didn't get out? So the Rosh asked this kasha, one of the Rishonim, and the Rosh says the difference is that the Jews that got out believed that they were deserving of getting out. It's not that the actions were different. In actions, they were all the same. They also struggled with avodah zarah. They struggled with avodah zarah. They struggled with this. They struggled with that. They both struggled the same way. The difference was that the Jews that got out believed that Klal Yisrael was deserving of getting out, and that's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. And he says like this: That's what the schos of emunah. He says. He quotes this on the next page. You guys don't have this, but when Moshe Rabbeinu was sent to, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was sent to Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Hein lo yaminu li." They're not going to believe me. What did he mean? They're not going to believe. Klal Yisrael is not going to believe. Klal Yisrael believed that they would be redeemed. The Medrash says that every Shabbos Klal Yisrael would get together and they would have Megillas. Mishtashem b'chol Shabbos v'Shabbos, that the Medrash says that they would take these scrolls out, and what would the scroll say? They would read it together every Shabbos, and what would the scroll say? That there's going to be a redemption, which means Klal Yisrael believed. Of course they believed that there would be a Mashiach, a redemption. So what does Moshe Rabbeinu mean? V'heim lo yaminu li? The answer is, Klal Yisrael knew there would be a redemption, but they knew that it was either Ita or Achishana. They didn't believe, Heim lo yaminu means they didn't believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would break the rules for them. They didn't believe that if neither of those solutions exist, that Hashem is still willing to say, I'm still going to do it for you. That's what they didn't believe. And the truth is, the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu was told to send to Paroi, the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu tells Paroi is the following pasuk: Amarta elav ko yamar Hashem b'ni b'chayri Yisrael. The first line that Hashem says to Paroi is b'ni b'chayri Yisrael. They're my firstborn. So why is that the first thing he says? So it says in the Siv Shalom, very beautiful. Paroi knew this. Paroi knew that the way they're going to get out is either time or worthy. He knew it wasn't time yet, and he also knew that due to him working Klal Yisrael, they weren't deserving either. But to that, Moshe Rabbeinu tells Paroi, "B'ni b'chayri Yisrael." They're my kid, and therefore I'm willing. There's nothing that a parent wouldn't do for their kid, and therefore there's no reason to assume that a human parent loves his child more than Hashem loves Klal Yisrael. That's a foolish thing to think. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu is telling Paroi, "B'ni b'chayri Yisrael," and that is that I know it's not Ita and I know it's not Echishan. So how is the redemption going to happen? Because B'ni b'chayri Yisrael, because they're my kid and I'm willing to break the rules for them. But you have to believe that Klal Yisrael is the children of Hashem, and you have to believe too that Klal Yisrael is deserving of this. That's the avodah right now. The avodah right now is you sort of look at the world and you say, well, it's definitely not Ita. I hope it's Achishena. Halavai, it should be Achishena. But even if it's not Loyaleinu, not Achishena, you know what? Hashem could still save Klal Yisrael right now. There's no reason why he can't. And the worse and the more crazy the world gets, that's more of a siba, that's more of a sign that it's time for this whole experiment to end, and therefore the more a Jew believes in that hanhaga, the more a Jew is malamed schus. That's what I can't go into Rabbi Weinberger. I spoke to Rabbi. I never do this, but I spoke to Rabbi Weinberger this week, and he told me not to. He didn't want me to tell the contents of the conversation, but the one thing he did say is that just the avodah right now is to not focus on anything negative about Klal Yisrael. And if you hear something negative about Klal, disregard. Focus on the positive. There's a lot more positive to focus on. And the more a Jew focuses on the greatness of the nation of Klal Yisrael and how you're seeing it now of what they're doing, things that you wouldn't expect, and everyone would have the excuse to not wear tefillin and to not put on tzitzis and to not do all these things. But not only that, and specifically more with the soldiers, because they're mamish being meiser nefesh, gufay kipshutay mamish, and they're in Gehenna on earth, and they're just saying Shema. That is impressive. That is a nation that is deserving of salvation. It might not be Ita, it might not be Achishana, but they deserve it. And the more a Jew focuses with that mentality, and this is coming from someone who I didn't always think this way. I could tell you with 100% certainty, if you know me old enough, if you know me long enough, this was not always my approach. But as you get older, you sort of have to soften a little bit, and you have to sort of see the truth, which is Klal Yisrael is deserving of it. And it's not a matter of whether we deserve. We deserve, that's for sure. Especially if you take into the account we haven't seen a Navi in 2,000 years. That's pretty impressive. You haven't seen a Navi in 2,000 years. All the more so how impressive we will be once Mashiach comes and all this suffering ends. Imagine if what we could actually do if we were able to just focus on growth as opposed to, survival mode. But that's the avodah. The more a Jew thinks in this way, that Klal Yisrael is deserving of salvation, with all the flaws, still head and shoulders above every other nation of the world, deserving of salvation. That's ma'oyer, that level of ahava, that geula shaloy al piseder of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kfay b'atzmai, which ultimately could happen right now. You don't even need Mashiach ben Yosef. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could happen b'kfay b'atzmai. That's how it happened in Mitzrayim, and that's how it'll happen as well. Shall be zoicha to just have this mentality, to just focus on the positive of Klal Yisrael, just focus on of their amazing talents and all the things that are being revealed now, which we didn't see months ago. And it's dafka in the most trying time that these things come out. And in that schus, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should look down on Klal Yisrael and say that I can't keep my children in this cage anymore. And ultimately, they should all be redeemed. Amen. My pleasure.